This happened to me during my first year of university, in October. I was living in the dorms and I need to give you a brief rundown of the rooms. You need a key card to gain access to your specific floor, so even though someone on the 3rd and 4th floor live in the same building, they can't access each other's floors. I had injured myself playing sports, so I was under orders to rest, which meant no Halloween parties for me. Pretty sad for a horror fiend like myself, but to try and make the time a happy one, I busied myself helping to make costumes for people and doing their makeup. Once I was finally finished, I packed up my makeup and decided to watch some movies in my room. A guy popped up and introduced himself. We chatted a bit and exchanged email addresses, and I walked back to my room and said goodnight. The first warning sign was that he walked into my room behind me. Despite me saying I was going to walk into my room, I felt really awkward and tried to say in a roundabout way that he needed to leave, but he wasn't getting the hint. I finally had to say, "You need to leave my room now." I chalked this up to him maybe being drunk or something, but I did wonder how he got onto my floor if he wasn't with anyone partying. Before I went to bed that night, I checked my email and there were 5 from that creep. The first being, "Hey, I'm so glad we're friends," and the rest asking why I wasn't online. A few days later, I got a knock on my door when I was studying, and it was him. I explained that I was studying and needed privacy. He tried to walk into my room again, but I braced my arm on the frame and said firmly that I need to study. The next day it was at my door again, and the next, and the next. I began pretending I wasn't home. Another day there was a knock at the door, and when I checked the peephole, there was no one there, and I assumed the postman had come. I opened the door and lo and behold, it was that creepy guy. He'd began hiding from the peephole, so I'd be more likely to answer the door to him. I told my roommate never to open the door if he was there, and I told people living on my floor that this guy was beginning to creep me out, so if he wanted to get on the floor, whatever sob story he gave them, don't let him on. A few days after that, I was on the bus coming home, and I got a text from someone who lived on my floor telling me not to come back because the creep was on the floor and sitting in front of my door, just waiting. I went to a friend's house and spent the night, and when I got home, I was told he waited for 4 fucking hours before leaving. At this point, I was getting freaked out. A few days after that, he began waiting outside the building, and if I left, he would follow me wherever I went. I was too spineless to tell him to go away, and I tried to be more passive about it. I never spoke, and never gave him any indication I was paying attention, but he followed me to class, the cafeteria, and everywhere else. I went to the resident advisor and told her what had happened. She spoke to the RA for his floor and was told that the creep had been telling his own RA that we were best friends and dating. My RA tried to explain that I was uncomfortable, but the other RA believed him, and that was that. Thankfully, one thing did deter him. He would never approach me if I was with a group of people. So my floor mates banded together. If I went to dinner, so did they. If I went for a drink, so did they. If I went to class, so did they. He got onto my floor once when someone else was coming home, and he forced his foot in the door to let himself in. I was hidden in another room, and when he left my door to go and sit in the television lounge to wait for me, I went downstairs and ran around the other side of the building and got into my room before he noticed. Then the phone calls began. I never gave him my number, but somehow he obtained my mobile and my room phone, and at first it would be 1 to 2 calls a day until I told him I wanted him to leave me alone. Then the calls began coming in every hour, with him begging and pleading for me to talk to him. He would call every day without caller ID, and that was the problem. I needed to use the phone. Like I said, I was suffering from an injury, and I needed to talk to the physicist to help me recover. I went back to the RA and begged her to help me. She went to the head of the dorms and explained everything that had happened. I explained how far this had gone, and my roommate told them that he had followed her for a few times, demanding that she tell him where I was. I felt awful. She never told me this because she was afraid of upsetting me further, and I felt like I was an arsehole for putting her through this garbage. I don't know what went on behind closed doors. From what I guess, he was told to leave me alone, and any further contact would result in him being kicked out of the dorms. There was one email that he went completely insane on me, telling me how awful I was. How could I do this to him? We were so happy together. Surely I was cheating on him with other men. After that, nothing. At first, I'd see him around campus. I'd run to the women's toilets to hide. I'd see him around town or around campus. He'd always just stare at me. Never tried to approach me. Never tried to get my attention, just staring. I used to walk by and try and pretend that I didn't notice him. I'd try really hard, but I was sweating and my heart just wouldn't stop pounding. A little backstory: I'm a 20-year-old, short, petite female working at Subway, and I can't help be nice to anyone, even if they creep me out. I'm a people pleaser, what can I say? And it usually ends in me feeling like shit. About a year ago we had this guy, 35 to 40 years old. He'd come in every day for his lunch. He was fascinated about my stretched ears and a few piercings I had on my face, and always asked questions. He would sit down after I rang him out and would watch me from his table for 2 hours, non-stop, just staring at me while I helped other customers. This goes on for about 2 weeks. Every day he'd ask for my number, saying he has plugs and tunnels he wants to give me, and see me wearing them in my ears. And I always politely declined. One day, I'm alone in the store because my manager had to run to the bank. We were really slow that day, so I was just in the back room messing around on my phone. I heard the door chime, looked up, and yet no one was there. Then I saw the man walk past the front of the store really quickly, like he was in a hurry. The store phone rings. "Thanks for calling Subway. How can I help you?"
This is the girl with the nice ears, right?
Yeah. Who is this?
Are you alone in the back room right now? Are you working by yourself?
At this point I got really creeped out and I knew it was him. I hung up and texted my manager the situation so she'd hurry back. He called again, this time asking me very, very weird questions. Like what I would do with him in a room that was locked, if I had a boyfriend, why I was playing hard to get, etc, etc. My manager gets back and I tell her everything. In the middle of lunch rush, he calls again. This time my manager answers the phone, and to this day she never told me what he said, but the look on her face made my spine shiver. She told him if he called again or showed up here again, she would call the police. I thought that was the end of it, but alas, I was wrong. 1 week later, I'm clocking out and getting ready to walk to my parked car in the front. When I look outside, I see him standing by my car, looking inside of it. I was an idiot and left the back door unlocked. I watched him crawl inside and shut the door. The creep was trying to hide in my fucking back seat, and God knows what he would do to me when I got in. My manager locked the door of the store and called the police. When they arrived, they had to pretty much drag him out of my car, and he was arrested. On him, he had a butcher's knife, rope, and a rag with chloroform on it. If I hadn't looked up when I did, let's just say I probably wouldn't be writing this story right now. When I first moved into a new place in a new town, I'd left home one evening and accidentally left my garage door open. I texted my husband to tell him to go home and close it. He gets there and tells me it's not open. That's strange, but okay. The next day I'm taking my trash out and my neighbours were outside. He introduced himself and told me that the night before he had noticed me leaving and I'd left my garage door open. So he went inside and closed it for me. And he let himself out through the front door, only locking the doorknob. Then he sent me a Facebook friend request. I'm assuming he looked at the mail on the counter to find out my full name. After this he wrote me poems and taped them to my door, left gifts on the front porch, made crazy Facebook posts about a woman he was in love with who was forbidden. I'm guessing because I'm married. One Saturday night I came home really late and I was finishing my cigarette outside of my garage before going in. He was sitting outside in a chair, blistering drunk. He approached me and started talking about someone named George. I had no idea what he was going on about, and confused, I asked him if he had company. He walked into the garage and came out of a box containing George. George was his stepdad, and he was dead. The ashes were in that box. He caught wind of a trip I was going on via Facebook and invited himself along. I politely explained that I'm married and all of this wacky behaviour was unacceptable. A few days later I'd gone on a walk with my husband and we left through the garage, leaving the door open. He messaged me on Facebook and told me he'd left a gift for me in my garage. When I got back, I found a bunch of camping gear inside of a giant Easter egg. After I got back from the trip, he showed up at the door at midnight, drunk and banging on the door. I wish I could say we moved before it got much, much worse. I've had a couple of stalkers. The one that freaked me out the most was in another country, and we never met. We first started talking on a website for pen pals. He lived in another country. He developed feelings really, really fast. I liked him very much in the beginning. Our relationship became sexual in nature. We made plans to meet. I was concerned with some things I considered red flags, confirmed by my friends and family. I decided to back off a bit. He didn't like that at all. I was super passive, trying to keep the peace without hurting or losing my friend. I started lying to him, out of fear. He'd interrogate me for hours about where I was going and who I was with. If I went to a party, he'd ask if I had slept with anyone, and then say he kind of hoped I had, so I could tell him how the sex was. It was getting to be too much. I was no longer interested in him romantically or sexually, but I would still engage with him sexually, just because I was afraid of him. In the meantime, I'd met and fell in love with my current soulmate, who was absolutely wonderful. Stalker was obsessed with everything about my budding relationship and wouldn't leave me be. I finally realised that my stalker made me feel disgusted, and I should not be involved with someone who made me feel afraid and disgusted. I told him that I didn't want to hear from him ever again. He ignored me. My soulmate contacted him and told him to leave me alone. He tried to interrogate him about the nature of our relationship, but my soulmate shut him down. I blocked him on everything. I realised that he was still reading my blog, so I deleted the whole thing. He made new email accounts and Facebook accounts constantly. He relentlessly Googled me and my partner, to the point that our names were amongst the top searches on multiple search engines. When he elicited no response, he started sending my partner screenshots of times we'd been sexual. I was mortified, but since I'd been 100% honest with him, it didn't break us up. My soulmate was obviously disturbed. We never responded to anything he sent. To my knowledge, he still creeps on us, but after that everything mostly stopped. I know he's probably thousands of miles away, and I've had stalkers who are in my immediate area, but he still scares me the most, especially because he types and even sometimes sounds like the way my now husband sounds. When I was in my final 2 years of high school, I'd get tutored for maths by a guy we called Brian. Brian was at least 65 years old and worked for the tutoring centre. I'd see him 2 afternoons a week for 45 minutes each. He seemed like a very lonely guy, never married, no kids, and from what I could tell, he had very little friends. I felt quite sorry for him. I was always really nice to Brian, and to avoid having to do maths homework, I would just ask him questions and try to start a conversation. All was well when I finished high school, and that was that. About 1 year later, my best friend's younger brother got tutored by Brian as well, and one day when dropping my friend's brother off, I said, "Say hi to Brian for me," as we got out of the car. About a week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Brian. He was saying how he'd really liked me, and now that he was tutoring Ben, friend's younger brother, he was excited that I mentioned to say hi. He took this the wrong way, and in the letter basically confessed the feelings he had had for me, and was so glad I felt the same way. He said some very creepy things in the letter about how I looked good in my school uniform, and always wanted to tell me that, but didn't want to get in trouble. I told my parents about this letter, and they approached the tutoring centre and told the owners. He ended up getting fired for this letter, and also for accessing personal information of clients for him to send the letter. About a week later, I started receiving flowers at my doorstep, and then that would be followed up with text messages to my mobile number, saying,
"Hope you like the flowers, and give me a call if you want to get a coffee."
My parents took this to the police, who then got in contact with Brian, and he was cautioned, and I never heard from him again after that. Although, according to Ben, Brian might have met a quite terrible fate in the end.